The Honda Civic Type R is the pinnacle of Honda engineering. It's got incredible handling, stout power, and track-inspired looks. You could call it the king.
Here's the deal. The Elantra N is the Civic Type R's worst nightmare. It's almost as fast, almost as powerful, and it costs $10,000 less.
And today, we're gonna find out who's right.
All right, the Elantra N and the Civic Type R, this generation's greatest sport compact rivalry. They're unusual rivals because this Elantra is much cheaper than the Civic Type R, but it achieves almost the same performance in almost every instrumented test it's been in. This updated 2025 Elantra N, which has stiffer bushings, a couple chassis updates and some calibration updates, laps within 1/10 of a second of the Civic Type R, which is super impressive considering it's down about 30 horsepower. The tires are 20 millimeters narrower, and overall it just has less technology to leverage. These two cars are on paper very similar, both 2-liter turbocharged manual transmission, front-wheel drive sport compact cars. Both achieve very similar power numbers, both achieve very similar lap times, but each have extremely different approaches to the issue of front-wheel drive. But the key to the Elantra N, and I think this is where it's misunderstood and where the Civic Type R are misunderstood, is that this car leverages mechanical grip and mechanical technology. People seem to think that the Type R has the clever differential. It's actually this car. This car is an electronically controlled limited slip differential, meaning that the computer in this car somewhere, some black box somewhere, decides how much the differential locks based on cornering conditions. So it can be fully open, 0% lock, or 85% locked together, meaning the two front wheels are locked together, 85% slip ratio. So what that does is it changes the balance of the car. The more locked the diff is, the more stable the car is, and the more traction it'll have. But the more open it is, the more it wants to turn, the more it wants to rotate. This car can really actively define itself foot by foot in each corner. It's really interesting. The Civic Type R, however, is a much more simple mechanical object, but it's a much more technologically leveraged car. So that car just has a helical limited slip differential, a mechanical limited slip, but it has a dual axis front strut suspension, which helps it with torque steer. It's a very complicated little setup. But really the secret to the Type R is electronics. The secret is that car is fully run off of a Bosch ECU and full system. So that car has brake vectoring. It's a very clever program that actively brakes each corner of the car based on what it's doing. So where the Elantra N has a diff that's deciding what to do, and the rest of the time it has a conventional, adaptive suspension that's very good and well tuned, but ultimately conventionally tuned. The Civic Type R is trying to define itself with brake vectoring and with torque management. It's two very different driving experiences and two kind of opposite approaches to the issue of front-wheel drive performance. That's not to say the Elantra N is not technologically advanced. This car still has adaptive dampers, it has good old chassis bracing, it still has something of a brake vectoring and torque managing program. It's not as advanced as the Type R's, and I think that's on purpose. It's not trying to rely on it as much. But the result is the Elantra N just feels more natural to drive. This car has nicer steering. It's much more suggestible and happy to turn. This reminds me of the Ioniq 5N a lot and Veloster N, and pretty much every N car I've driven. These cars just have such good natural sensation, where that Type R feels kind of big and a little pudgy, and you could feel it sort of pulling you around using its clever tech, where this thing is just, it's so easy to get lost in driving this car. I enjoy this car much more to drive than the Type R on a canyon road like this. And I think where this car objectively loses is two areas. One, there's no big ass hatch. Okay, you just got a trunk, and there's a brace in the middle of it, so you can't really use it. Two, this manual gearbox is okay. It's fine. The actual shifter is just like this big plasticky thing. The clutch has a weird engagement point. At least I could say the flywheel is light and revs drop fast. That's good. It's still a good enough gearbox that it's enjoyable, but compared to the FL5, compared to the Type R, it's got nothing. It's really got nothing on that. I think it's fascinating that both are on the same tire, PS4S, the Michelin PS4S. I think any enthusiast knows and loves this tire. And how they achieve similar performance and the Elantra N uses a narrower tire is fascinating to me. It almost makes me think Honda was caught sleeping with this car. They developed the FL5 not thinking someone is going to come and big dog them, but I really, just right now, oh my God, like... This car will come around on you where the Type R never will. And to some people, that's a minus, that a car will step out on you. I think it's such a plus. The car's alive, it's talking to you, it's letting you know, and it's also giving you options. And the Type R, I feel like I don't have options. I have to drive it its way. This car can drive my way. It'll listen to what I want to do. This is an experience car, and the Type R is a very serious car. Really, when you look at this, it just looks like an Elantra, and when you look at the Type R, you see the volume of the fenders, and you see that it's something special, very obviously, even to normal people. Bottom line is, looking at this car, it's not cool. Both generations are giving carp. They just don't look great, and seeing one on the street, you're not going to be very impressed by it. Where you see a Type R and it has this presence, it has this thing going on that the Elantra N just can't match. That's most of where your 10 grand's going to go, I think. So for 2025, the Civic Type R has not changed anything, where the Elantra N has actually changed a lot. So there's new forged wheels that are about 25, 30 pounds lighter. There's new rear suspension bushings that are a bit stiffer, polyurethane bushings, and there's a lot of improvements. There's a different steering calibration to make up for the lighter wheels, and there's an updated adaptive damper calibration that means they ride a bit better. Before, the Elantra N was a little stiff and a bit unbalanced in its earliest generations. A bit more ass happy, which I was a fan of. This car drives a bit more stable than the old one, which is a positive for most people, I think. I think it lost a little bit of its character in that change. Still pretty good. Type R, 0 changes, 3 years into production, which I think is a little weird. Not even a bigger screen, nothing. They've just left it alone. And now that the Elantra is really creeping up on it, I think it's time for the Type R to make some updates, but we'll see what they do. I think that's plenty of yapping for me about performance. Let's check in with Alanis and see what she thinks of everything else.
Oh, I like this so much better. I totally disagree with him. Welcome to the Civic Type R. You just heard from Mr. Driving Dynamics, Chris Rosales, and we love driving dynamics on this channel. But we're going to talk a little bit about livability in my segment, and livability includes driving. In any manual car, you start with 2 inputs. You start with your clutch and your shift knob. And I really like the Civic Type R's clutch and shift knob better than the Elantra N, especially for daily driving. In the Elantra N, it feels like you need to give it more gas to get it going. So if I'm in a parking lot, I can't just very easily apply the gas and let off the clutch. It needs a little more to be fed to it. And not only does that feel wasteful to me because I'm sitting in a parking lot giving it more gas than it needs, but it also just isn't as easy. In this car, you can just easily give it gas and get going, and it's nice for daily driving. And then you bring it out on the good roads like this, and it is so tight and stiff. And in the Elantra N, there's more play. You know, I'm on this road and I'm kind of like, the steering has more play in its normal driving mode. It doesn't feel nearly as precise as this car in its normal driving mode. Obviously, cars change a lot when you take them and you put them in their like really cool mode, like Plus R in this car, which makes it stiffer, or the N mode in the Elantra. But normal driving mode, this one feels so much more precise. I just feel like I'm on the racetrack and I'm ready to go. And it really appeals to my carboy senses. I also think there is a practicality argument to the shift knob that the Elantra N wins. I love the feel of the very metally shift knob on the Civic Type R, but you get in the Elantra N and it has that like plastic cap on the shift knob, and it kind of feels like a golf ball in your hands. And do I like this feel better? Yes. Do I also recognize that when it's really hot outside or really cold outside, this metal shift knob is gonna feel really hot or really cold? Yeah, so if you don't want to put a glove on your shift knob if you live in a harsh climate, the Elantra N's more comfortable. The interior overall, I like the Civic Type R better, but there are a few instances where the Elantra N is winning. One of those instances is the buttons. The Elantra N has specific buttons for media, navigation, phone setup, everything like that, whereas in the Type R, you're gonna have to use the screen. And if something terrible happens and your screen goes out, you're gonna lose access to those buttons. The Elantra N loses in piano black because in the Civic Type R, you will notice around the shifter and the cup holders, I have a lot of silver. And that is lovely because if you get grease and dirt and your sticky little fingers on there, it's gonna be gross within 5 minutes. And if you're in the Civic Type R, you have all of this silver, and it's not gonna get disgusting like piano black would. So, win for the Civic Type R there. Place where the Elantra N, I would say, might not be as good for the long term. Obviously, I haven't done rigorous interior vehicle testing, but I worry when we have these modern screens that just stick up from the dashboard. And the Civic Type R's screen sticks up so far from the dashboard. That means there's a lot of sun coming in, hitting it and heating it up. And you know how it is when screens get hot. TVs get bleeding, computers get bleeding on their screens when they get hot. I worry about that. In the Elantra N, it's more tucked in on the dashboard. The Civic Type R inside feels so much more boy racer. Every Civic Type R comes with this bright red interior that you literally cannot ignore because it's so bright, and it just feels more stylized in here. I have these funky little vent toggles that are different than most cars. They're on all the Civics, but they're different than a lot of other cars. Whereas the Elantra N, you get in, you have that black interior, you have the normal vent adjustments. It doesn't look nearly as unique and weird. Now, something I do like about the Elantra N is on the back of the seats, you have a glowing in logo, and it is stunning. Whereas in the Type R, you just have the little embossed logo that's still red. You don't really see it. Now, while the inside of the Civic Type R looks more boy racer than the Elantra N, the Elantra N has one really cool feature that is so much boy racer, and that is right next to your shifter, you have an oh shit handle for the passenger. So basically, if I get in the mountains and I start ripping really hard because I'm no longer talking to you and I'm no longer distracted, you're right here holding that handle, and you're okay if you're in the passenger seat. It's not that scary. It is that scary, but you have a handle to hold on to. Livability wise with tech, I think the Type R wins, but there are a couple of places where the Elantra is better. One place where the Elantra N has a slight advantage USB wise is that in the Civic Type R you have two USB-A's. The Elantra N has one USB-A and one USB-C. So if you happen to have your new phone cord or your old phone cord, you can use either of them, which is nice. If you live in a cold climate, the Elantra N may just win if you're like me, because it has seat heaters. There's none of that in this car. The Elantra N though, you can cook yourself while you're driving through the mountains or in the snow. On the gauges in these cars, I like the Type R so much better. Just the general setting on the gauges feels so much more intuitive to me. I have my speed very, very big in numbers. And I also have these shift indicator lights that light up to tell you when to shift, and it makes you feel so sporty and exciting. The standard gauge setup on the digital gauge on the Elantra N actually kind of feels like a hybrid car gauge setup to me, and I don't feel like I'm as aware of what is going on. I don't have as much information as I get in this Type R's gauge cluster. Like the seat heaters, if you are an absolute stickler for certain features, you may want an Elantra N for the manual handbrake. You can actually pull up a handbrake. In this car, you get an electronic handbrake, and I have never understood that because the Civic Type R is the king of hot hatches. It is the car. Why does it have an electronic parking brake? I will preface this point by saying that this week I have only driven the Type R on the good roads. I have not driven it on the highway, but anecdotally, the Elantra N is better from a noise perspective on normal straight shot highways. I feel like you're gonna have less highway and road noise in an Elantra N, whereas I always find kind of all Civics has a lot of highway road noise, and that's a big detractor if you're paying $45,000 for a car. Another thing that has to do with long trip comfort, I always describe it as these seats with these harsh bolsters are kind of built for a Richard Hammond body type, and I don't have a Richard Hammond body type, so I have to get used to the bolsters really squeezing on my hips, and it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. The Elantra N is a lot more comfortable from that standpoint than this car is. The Honda Civic Type R and the Hyundai Elantra N are both hot hatches, and they're both really fun, and they're both great to have out on the good roads, and they're also pretty great to drive around town. They're the perfect blend between performance and practicality without just going too wild on the budget. Let's meet up with Rosales and talk a little bit more about these two cars.
So,
Doesn't this thing have so much more curb appeal?
yes, but this drives better by a lot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can fight about that later. Get back in the car, do that. But for now, I think we should go over some specifics about these cars.
Okay, regale the viewer.
The Honda Civic Type R, as young and spry as it may look, is actually a mainstay on the hot hatch market. The Type R badge debuted on the 1992 Honda NSX, and in the modern world, the Civic Type R represents the top model in the Civic lineup. We start with the normal car, which is what most people buy, and then you have the Honda Civic Si, which is like the sport light version. Then we get to the Type R, which is the all-out hardcore hot hatch. Both the Si and the Type R only come with a manual transmission. The Honda Civic Type R specifically debuted in 1997, but America did not get this car until 20 years later in 2017, and that generation was nicknamed the FK8. The FK8 looked like a literal robot battle movie prop. It was absolutely ridiculous, and it stayed on the market until 2021. After that, we got this car, the much more mature, refined, handsome Type R, and it was nicknamed the FL5. And you might be thinking, Alanis, if most people buy the normal Civic, why does an Si or a Type R exist? And the answer is that over the lifetime of the car, Honda has sold about 30 million Civics globally. And cars like the Si and the Type R are the marketing cars. They make the normal Civic look sporty and fun, just like these cars are.
Blah, 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 market context. Let's talk about the fun stuff with this car. This is the K20C1 engine, 2-liter turbo, 4-cylinder engine, makes about 315 horsepower. The big headlining change versus the FK8 is cooling. So they changed the sizing of the turbocharger, changed the radiator, went to a single fan setup, and added a hood vent to make sure the thing could cool itself on track. Here's the problem, is it doesn't cool itself on track. It still overheats. It's still an issue, and I think that's a little unacceptable at its price point. The Elantra N does not have that issue. Still, very good engine from Honda, really powerful, really smooth, really nice. Underneath these strut towers is the dual axis strut front suspension. Basically, it moves the strut axis, this is a very nerdy thing, we're gonna have to put overlays on this, the strut axis outward and more upright so you get less torque steer. It also optimizes suspension geometry, makes the car corner better. A lot of clever tech here, but a lot of the secrets, like I mentioned before, is in those little modules over there. Bosch ABS, Bosch engine management, very clever stuff.
Back to me with my little market context over here. The Hyundai Elantra N, compared to the Civic Type R, is brand new to the hot hatch market. And you might go, Alanis, that is not a hatchback, that is a sedan. And you would be correct. I think the problem with the hot hatch name is that we coined it and then we didn't coin anything more general. So we just have this blanket kind of market of hot hatches, but not everything is a hatch. But we just have to roll with the misnomer. The N brand launched in 2012, and the N specifically stands for two things: the Namyang district in South Korea, which is where the N brand was born, and the Nürburgring, which is a racetrack in Germany where automakers go to test all of their cars. The N brand spans the entire Hyundai lineup. But the Elantra N as a model debuted in 2022. That means this car is in its first generation compared to 6 generations of Type R. There is so much brand loyalty and reputation behind the Type R that the Elantra N has not had time to build yet. But if there's anything that Hyundai is really good at, it's flipping reputations in its favor with really, really good cars.
Okay, market context, that was over. Let's talk about the fun stuff again. All right, get rid of that shit. This is the 2-liter Theta engine, 2-liter turbocharged, about 276 horsepower. Pretty good engine, no special technology to really write home about. It's mostly based on the normal 2-liter. Turbos back here, resized, bigger for the Elantra N. Cooling on this car is actually really good, figured out. You can track these things all day as long as it has the manual. I hear that the dual clutch has slight cooling issues. Otherwise, I think there's just general reliability question marks with this engine because it's already been part of a recall, kind of an unproven platform. So we'll see how that develops. Otherwise, very simple, straightforward. Underneath these strut towers, conventional McPherson strut front suspension without any of the fancy stuff of the Type R. What it does have is something called the integrated drive axle. Basically, it moves the outer point of the axle closer to the outer part of the tire. It helps with torque steer, kind of an innovation from Hyundai's WRC team. minor, but there, it's interesting. Overall, very simple, pretty good actually, good package. I'd argue better than the Type Rs in terms of tracking, but maybe a little less inspiring. Still pretty quick.
One thing I talked about was the oh shit handle.
Yeah.
So now that you're driving, I get to demonstrate the oh shit handle.
Let me show you something about the oh shit handle. It's really, that's okay. I'll give it to the Civic.
Because I was in the Civic Type R talking about it, but I didn't have it there to wobble.
Yeah. It moves. Yeah, we're not even like hitting it, you know what I mean?
No, and it is moving with me. Okay, so after driving both of them back to back in their performance modes, why are you still on the Elantra N?
So this car, I think the sensation is what gets me. The steering is nicer in this car. To me, it's nicer. I think the chassis balance, much more mechanical. Mm-hmm. I can feel the FL5, the Type R, sorry, leveraging itself in its technology, where this just feels natural, like an old school kind of hot hatch vibe. And it's just fast steering. It just drives and it lives on center, and it's just moving and settling into a turn so nicely to me. I like when the car's moving around, and the Type R is so settled and precise.
You're so right, and I think it's really about what you value and what you want out of the driving experience. Because for me, I really do enjoy that the Type R is so precise, and it doesn't need to settle. It is just planted and there. I really value that and like that a lot, but I can understand the appeal of the Elantra N in this aspect.
Mm-hmm. I think the two cars also have really similar tech. Both cars have all these performance displays that show you your oil temperature and your throttle position and your lap time and all this stuff. So they're all both similar in this way. They both offer similar technology, which I really like. I think where the Hyundai loses really is the interior gets a lot of demerit. I think for a lot of people, I think it's fine. I don't know what you think, but I think the seats, the essentials are nice here. The steering wheel is nice, the seat's nice, but the actual quality, like I demonstrated, it's a bit, you know.
So I think something that the Type R does really well and has done for a long time, literally since its inception, is having that standard boy racer interior. You get in that car and it is bright red. When the Civic Type R debuted, it was white with red inside. That car debuted, and you just know it's a Type R, and it screams Type R, and you get in and it's a little obnoxious, but it's obnoxious in the way you want it to be obnoxious. And I think the interior in the Elantra N is lovely, but doesn't have that like teenage angst boy racer vibe. No, it doesn't.
No, it's a bit normal in here, I think.
It's a bit normal.
It's actually like very German. It's very like they hired Albert Biermann to do the car. You know what I mean? Like it's very much like that.
I also think there are stylistic things. When you look at this dash area, it looks very normal. When you look at your vent adjustments, they're just flat, normal vent adjustments. In the Type R, it has that hexagonal weaving and those like toggles for the vents.
The AC, the climate control knobs.
They're lovely.
Yeah.
And it feels more specifically stylized. I think both of them are great, and both of them are super livable interiors, and I would not mind driving either of them every single day. But the Type R just makes me feel more. It makes me more emotional than this interior does.
Type R is a more special experience, I think, overall.
It is.
I will say a lot of what the Type R brings is heritage and that long sort of, you know, because the red carpets, the red seats are a move on nostalgia. They remind you of the NSXR. They remind you of the Integra Type R. Those cars had red carpets, sparse interiors. And this car has a bit more of this like rawness feel to it, I think. This car feels more alive on the road than the FL5, which is really interesting that the Type R isn't the alive one in the comparison.
But I also get it, because when you've been around for so long and you've been doing the same thing for so long, you could criticize it for still needing to settle into the corner.
Yeah.
You know, like you also have to think about what is perception going to be from the people who drive these and review these and ultimately impact public opinion? Are they going to say, hey, you still shouldn't have that period of settling into the corner because it's been around long enough to fix that? You really have to think about perception. And I do think that probably has an impact on it.
You know what I think it is? This is the point I think I'm trying to illustrate, is that I think the Elantra N's biggest benefit and also biggest detriment is that it's ultimately, it's a sophomore effort, an amateur effort. This is their first attempt at a performance sedan like this. I mean, this has been refined over a few years, obviously, but this is one of their first few products with the N brand. And where the Type R, well, also here's the different engineering philosophies between the two companies, is Hyundai hired a bunch of Germans. where Honda has been refining for decades on what, and also Honda just sort of engineers things to perfection to a fault. You know, you drive a Honda performance car and it's so perfectly good that it almost, to me, has no character. But it does have character, where this has this raggedness and this amateurish charm to it, that they're like trying stuff, you know?
We have now driven both the Hyundai Elantra N and the Honda Civic Type R. And because Chris and I started this video completely disagreeing with each other, I think the only fair way to settle a winner is to go category by category and add up the total. Our first of 5 categories is looks, and I think this is easy. Type R.
It's Type R. It's Type R. This looks like a robot turd that is built very poorly, to be honest, and the facelift didn't really help it. The F05 has remained regal and beautiful.
I think it's possible that you look at this car by itself and you go, yeah, that looks fine, but it also just looks like an Elantra, whereas the Type R really has that presence, and that's important. Our next category is daily drivability, and again, Honda Civic Type R. When you're in the Civic Type R, it's just easier to drive in parking lots and low speeds. The Elantra N wants a weird amount of gas with that first gear clutch engagement, and it's just odd.
I think there's also a size thing here. So Civic Type R, I took on a nice long road trip this weekend and I put 8 tires in it. I drove it up to my race team. This, I could not do that. There's a chassis brace in the middle of it. There's like less stuff. The fuel economy isn't much better than the Type R, if at all. Both cars are kind of like limited on range, but the Type R is more usable by a lot. And it's much more comfortable on the road, I think. Better ride, nicer insulation, nicer seats.
I think we're gonna have a tough time with this category, which is handling.
Handling is subjective, isn't it?
It is so subjective.
I think the Elantra N handles better. I think it's a more fun car to drive, but that car is more precise.
And I like preciseness. So I say Type R, which means we disagree.
We disagree on this category, I think, pretty firmly.
Next category is performance, and I will let Chris take that one away.
Here's the deal, is the Elantra N performs the same as the Type R for $10,000 less, and I think that can't be ignored. This car is within a 1/10 of a second on every instrumented lap time test. It accelerates almost the same. It goes around the corner at almost the same G. The fact that this car performs the same for $10,000 less can't be ignored, so I think this has to win that. This wins in performance.
I agree, which leads us to our next category, which is value, and it's easy to say value-wise, the Elantra N wins. The Honda Civic Type R starts at $45,000 now. This is 10 grand less. You can't really beat that.
You get all the gadgets. You get all the track helper stuff. You get all the telemetry. You get all the, you get the seats. You get the performance stuff. You get a lot of stuff for your money that you really get on the Type R. This is a real value proposition, or the Type R is overpriced. One of these cars undercuts and one of these overcuts. I'm not sure which.
If you're keeping track, we had 5 categories. The Honda Civic Type R won 2 of them. The Hyundai Elantra N won the other 2. And on the last one, we completely disagreed. That means we're tied. So, Rosales, how do we settle this?
I think it's rock, paper, scissors, isn't it?
Oh,
out of 1.
Okay, competitions make me nervous, but I'll do it. I'll do it. Okay.
Winner takes all. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah, damn it. Okay, fine. Type R takes it.
Slice it through your paper, just like we did on these roads.
Okay.
The Honda Civic Type R wins. And I think that goes back to the main point, which is, which one would you rather be seen in? The Honda Civic.
Yeah, it's a Type R. It's
Type R.
It's a Type R.
Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see more of our YouTube videos, check out the Motor1 channel and be sure to subscribe. And if you want to read what we write, go to motor1.com. We'll see you next time.